All right, so we're going to be setting up we're going to be deploying an Express server to Heroku. So let's get into it. We have an Express app here, just a minimal example, the hello world. And so what we want to do now is put this on Heroku. Okay, so let's see how to do that. So our first step is we need to download the Heroku CLI. So we're going to go over here to the docs. All right, so I'm just going to open it up here. We got the links in the show notes. So I'm on Windows 64-bit, so I'm going to get that, click this button. Hit save, and we're good to go. So I'm going to open this up, run it, add to the path. That's exactly what I want. Hit next, install, and there we go.
And so the adding to the path is going to let us use it in our shell of choice.
Exactly. We'll be able to run the Heroku commands from the command line or any other terminal, right? So PowerShell, Git Bash, all the same thing. All right, our install is done. So let's head back to VS Code. All right, so here we are.
So, okay, so we're in VS Code. How do we know Heroku's installed and that we can use it?
All right, so we're going to use the Heroku in the terminal down here. Let me just close this out real quick. So you can go up to the top and do new terminal. And so what we can type here is Heroku -- version, which will allow us to check. You might have to restart VS Code just to make sure that VS Code picks up your new path variables. So I'm going to do Heroku version, and you can see that it's displaying the version, which means that it is installed successfully. All right, cool. So the next thing we need to do is we need to log in to Heroku. So there's a command for that. We can just do Heroku login. It's going to say press any key to open up the browser. I'm going to do that. Just hit this big login button. Now it tells me I'm logged in, and I can close this out. Head back to VS Code, and it looks like we are good to go. All right, cool. So to deploy a app to Heroku, you actually need to use Git. You have to commit your files and then push it to their Git server. So we're going to initialize a Git project here just using the git init command. So git init, and there we go. Okay, so now the next step is we want to create an app on Heroku, and they give us the Heroku create command, which we can use, and they'll generate the app and a Git server for us to push to. So let's go ahead and do that. And I'll do Heroku create, and let's see what that does. There we go. It gave us a URL, an app, and a Git server to push to. And we can also see that this Git server, they've already added it to our remote list for Git. So let's just take a look at that. I'll do git remote -v. And you can see here that we now have a site called Heroku, and then that site has the URL that they gave us. Perfect.
So now we can, any of our code, we can commit it, and then we can push it to that Git server hosted by Heroku.
Exactly, and then they'll deploy it for us. Okay, so before we push the code now, we need to notice here, over in VS Code, it's telling me that it wants to add 331 files. That's way too many files. And the reason for this is because VS Code right now thinks that it should push the node modules. Now, sometimes you want to do this on like S3, for example, but that's a side note. In our case, we do not want to push the node modules because when we push, Heroku will automatically pull our app, install the node modules for us, and then deploy it. So we can go ahead and ignore that. And the way you ignore in Git is you use a .gitignore, so a gitignore file. All right, so let's create that, .gitignore. And then I'm just going to type in to ignore node modules, if I can spell it. And when I save, you can see that the node modules went gray, and this number over here went down to 4. So great, we're only going to add 4 files. Let's go ahead and add these, and then say initial commit, because you can only push committed changes. Otherwise, Heroku is not going to notice it. Okay, so just taking a quick look at the docs. Now that we've created an app, the next step is to push to that remote server called Heroku, our master branch. And you can also push other branches. That's something we can look at another time. All right, so let's just go ahead and do this. Git push Heroku master, and let's see what happens. Okay, so what's happening right now is something different than if you push to like GitHub or something. This is actually the output from Heroku showing you that it's building your app. So you can see up there that it installed Node modules for us, and it's doing all the necessary steps to deploy the app. And down here, it says it's deployed. Okay, so now that we're deployed, we can use the open command, and Heroku will automatically open our app. Heroku open, and there we go. But unfortunately, we're still stuck in a loading phase. So we could think maybe it's still building, we don't know, or maybe we have some errors. I happen to know that there's an error, but let's go track it down and see how we can look at that. So our app is called Lit Savannah, which is kind of funny. So I'm going to go to my personal apps here and just search for that. Oh, sorry, let me refresh. Search for the app, and here it is. So I'm going to click
this.
this.
Is the repo in Heroku that we push, and this is how we can access it in the browser.
This is actually the app that's linked to the repo. But what we want to look at right now is the logs, because we want to see if there's any problem with our app. We can see here now that we have an application error. You could use the command line, by the way, which is a nice thing, but I really want to show you the dashboard too. So we'll click more up here in the top right, and then we'll do view logs. And we can see right here that there's an error. Also notice that it doesn't keep all the logs. You have to add a plugin for that.
Right.
Yep. So we can see here that we have a web process failed to bind to port. Port is the environment variable that Heroku sets for you. So Heroku does a lot of things behind the scenes. They don't give you a lot of control. If you're publishing to something like AWS, you can actually pick your port and open it up, but that's a lot of steps. So Heroku just gives you a port and you have to bind to it. Let's go back to our app.
So Keith, how do we bind to it?
We tell Express to bind to it.
Okay. So we're going back to our app, going back into our code.
So go back to our code, and we can see here that we have this port variable, and we told Express right here to listen to that port. Now, Heroku didn't give us 3,000 ports, so we're unlucky. Maybe sometimes they do, and you are lucky. But in this case, we are not. So we need to actually change this to use that environment variable. So to do that, we can use the process global object, process.environment.port. That's the name that was in the logs.
Mm-hmm.
And just so it works locally for us as well, because we don't have port defined, we could define port, or I can just use the or command to say if port's not defined, just use that 3,000 that we already had.
Right, and that means it'll work locally because we haven't set port.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Okay.
So now we need to commit this. So I'll just use the command line to commit now, just to give some variety. So I'll do git add. I'm just going to add all the files. There's only one change here.
Mm-hmm.
Do git commit, then added port environment variable use. Okay. So now I'm just going to push to Heroku,
mm-hmm.
and it's going to redeploy our app.
So just pushing to Heroku is going to redeploy our app.
Just pushing to that Git server that they gave us sends a trigger. Okay, so you can do this in GitHub as well, something else to look at.
Mm-hmm.
But Heroku already has that set up already for you. And you push to their Git, they're like watching for changes, and then they'll deploy the app for you when you make changes. Okay, great. So our app is now redeployed. So let's go take a look at it. Okay, in the logs here, you can see that the state changed from starting to up. So it looks like we successfully are live. And you can even see the port that is signed, 31,869. Let's go over here and refresh. And there we go. Our app is now deployed.
We have deployed an Express app to Heroku that everybody can use and get Hello World.
Super useful.
Yeah,
but hey, we deployed something.
Awesome. And that wasn't as hard as it seems. And now it is live for the world. And you can do this once we add roots to the Express app, we add front end for it, then we've got a fully fledged app, and it's all deployed through Heroku.
Yep, exactly.